These naval architects to be, professors, administration, staff, family, spouses, partners, friends, and guests. Everybody is welcome. Tonight is my honor to introduce Vicky, sitting right in front of me, who is the 2025 recipient of the William Selkirk Owen Award. I have known Vicky for almost 41 years. Wow. Since the class of 1988 first assembled here in Stevenson Taylor Hall, wondering what the hell we had gotten ourselves into. So I know how awesome she is. The Webb Alumni Association officers know how awesome she is because they decided to give her this award. And I want to make sure that you know how awesome she is. Now, some of you may have seen the inaugural pubcast with Dean Werner, so I'm going to try not to go over everything that he said, but you should watch it because it's fun and it's very interesting and you learn a lot about Vicky. So first we're going to go way back and go to rewind to the very beginning about Vicky. Victoria, no middle name, Dlugokecki, was born in the 1960s in Hollis, Queens. She was the first child of Florence Bonaspina, who is here with us tonight. Florence, 94 years young. And Charles Dlugokecki. People think Dlugokecki, they think Vicky is Polish. She's just as Italian as she is Polish. So the first few years they lived in South Floral Park, and then after a couple of years they moved to Franklin Square. A brother, Christopher, was born soon after. We'll talk about Chris a little bit. I think we all know Chris. But first I have to tell the story about Vicky's father. And this, I think, gives an insight into the way that she's lived her life. So Vicky's father, Charles, was a New York police officer. And you can look this up in the New York Times. It's all there. You just search Dlugokecki, it's the first thing that comes up. His beat was Central Park. One fine day in 1971, he was on his beat. All of a sudden there was commotion. Something was going on. People were screaming. There was all sorts of people didn't know what was happening. Manhattan, 1970, a little bit of a scary place to be. Charles leapt into action to protect one of Gotham's citizens. He had never before or since pulled out his service revolver. But in this particular instance, he had to pull his service revolver out. He fired 2 warning shots into the air because somebody was being attacked. The attacker didn't stop. So Charles took careful aim. He shot the attacker, who was only 6 years old. A polar bear named Scandy in the Central Park Zoo. And it was later determined that the attacker had jumped over one fence and was taunting the polar bear through the second fence. And on the way to the hospital, Charles, Vicky's father, wrote him a ticket because that's illegal to taunt a bear. So this is a funny story, but I think it's important to mention it because it kind of gives you an idea of, Vicky is the daughter of a public servant, and she was able, Charles's dedication to the people she followed up with. So Vicky went to public schools in the area, graduating from Sewanaka High School in the pre-engineering program. She applied to Webb, but was not accepted. Not accepted. Not yet. So she went to George Washington University in Washington, D.C. for a year, majoring in biomedical engineering. But she never lost track of her goal, and she applied after a year and got in. Incidentally, that's the exact same path that her brother Chris took. He went to SUNY Maritime for a year. So it makes me think that the word Dlugokecki is Polish for tenacious. So my first memory of Vicky was at the swim test. And she had been a lifeguard in Franklin Square, I assume. And we all go out on the float. They still had the float there. We jumped in the water. We start swimming. And Vicky went out to the buoy and back before any of us had really ever moved. And I was like, wow, that is impressive. She is really fast. So some of the things she did here when she was at Webb, she was the business manager of the Binnacle for 3 years. This is in the podcast. Back when the Binnacle had to be a self-supporting publication, and her big thing was trying to make sure that she got enough money from vendors in order to have a color cover, and she did that. She was the class president for junior and senior year. She was a social committee chair, and lots of people will tell you about Greek Week for a Day, which we organized right here on the first terrace. And the reason we gave Vicky the job of being Greek Week for a Day is because she had spent a year at a real college. So for senior thesis, she partnered with Steve Matz. Steve, raise your hand. They did, raise your hand. They did model testing of catamarans. And for the young folk around here, I'll just point out that back then, the model basin, the carriage was a glorified like spring with a pointer on it. So when they were doing their testing, it was a planing vessel, so it went fast. So they were running down the model basin. One of them had to look at the spring to see where the dynamometer was, and the other one had to look at to see where the spray was coming off the chine. Most of the time, then they had to go back and say, "Did you see it?" "No, I didn't see it." "Okay, let's do it again." So I didn't think that cardio was part of the senior thesis, but in their case it was. So Vicky had the usual assortments of jobs at Webb. In her freshman year, she was an outside machinist at Newport News doing pipe fleshing, although she will say that the actual job description was waiting on riggers. If you've ever worked in a shipyard, you know what that means. She spent most of her time on the Theodore Roosevelt aircraft carrier, and the work schedule was such that you had to go on board before the sun rose, work all day in the winter, and then you got off after the sun set. So she never saw the sun during the daytime. Now, no introduction to Webb would be complete without a sea story. So on the sophomore year cruise, Vicky and Nancy, wave your hand, were on the Exxon Charleston. Myself and Mike Musatow were on the Exxon Wilmington, sister ships built at Avondale. And we both left our respective ports. We left Baton Rouge and they left Baytown about the same time. And if you can believe it, both ships arrived at the exact same moment, one right behind each other, going under the Verrazano Narrows Bridge. And we anchored at Stapleton because we were both going to lighter, and we took the launches ashore at Stapleton Anchorage into Staten Island, where we then proceeded to buy a case of beer and drink it. And it was in front of a junkyard overlooking New York Harbor in late January when it's nice and warm, and there was feral dogs running around us the whole time. So good times, we're still alive. She worked her summers at Gibbs & Cox on 32nd Street in Manhattan, and she started off doing drafting on FFG7s. I was there the first year that she was there. And this was the good old-fashioned ink on Mylar stuff. Something that the young kids here will never know the special joy that comes when you make a beautiful drawing and then you smudge the ink the very last thing before you're done. However, Vicky was not good at ink on Mylar, and she broke 3 of the Koh-i-Noor pens her first week there. And they said, "Oh, we need you to do something else, Vicky." So they promoted her. I was good at drafting. I stayed doing drafting the rest of my summer. Steve Matz also worked there, and they were doing the initial design of the DDG-51. DDG-51 was started being designed in Manhattan in 1985-ish. And what I will say to the people who are involved in the Navy, you still haven't had a successful non-nuclear surface combatant since Vicky left. So you can take that from you want, and maybe you could hire Vicky as a consultant to make the next destroyer more successful. Her junior and senior year, she was working in combustion engineering in Connecticut, where she was converting the programs for designing boilers from Fortran into BASIC. And she found a mistake in the do loop that was designing the size of the tubes. Brought it to her superintendent, and the boss said, "Geez, Vicky, you saved us millions of dollars by fixing this bug." And the other thing that she learned was that the other job they gave her was trying to figure out if PCs were really going to stick around and be useful. So they gave her a bunch of floppy disks and they tried to destroy them and see if they would still work. So we should bring them outside and rub them in the dirt and the snow and see if they work. A couple more anecdotes and then we'll get into the achievements. She was the first person in our class really to have a car, and everybody in our class remembers the Chrysler Cordoba, which had rich Corinthian leather. She was the de facto Long Island social director, so we went to all the Long Island places like Dublin Pub, Oak Beach Inn, and Malibu. They're probably all gone now. Before we close out our discussion of Vicky's history, the one thing which I want to say, and I'm very proud of, is our class, we started with 23, we graduated 19, but none of our class failed out. None of us failed out. And I want to say that that was in large part to being Vicky's leadership. We had to drag a few people across the finish line. I'm not going to say who they were, Ian Bush. But Vicky made sure that we all stuck together and we got the job done. Vicky went on after graduation to MIT, where she got a master's degree in Ocean Systems Management, which is Hank Marcus's program. I don't have stories about that, but Ian Bush is here. Ian, wave your hand. Ian can tell you all the stories about things that went on at MIT. Vicky's first job in industry was at C.R. Cushing on VC Street in Manhattan. She did a few interesting jobs, like reviewing the designs for 9 Del Monte reefers that were later built in Spain. She followed that up and rowed the ships, instituting the spare parts program. After a few years there, she moved across the street to ABS, when ABS was on the 106th floor of the World Trade Center. And she was first in the consistency group and then in rules development. And she became the ABS guru on composites, which included, as I believe, some really good boondoggles to Italy. She was ABS for 2 years and then decided that she wanted to move into shipbuilding, so off to NASSCO she went. Now, it's not very easy for somebody from Long Island, spent their whole life on Long Island, to move to San Diego, but Vicky did it. She was the initial design and naval architecture supervisor. And her first big job was the Tote Orca class Ro-Ros. She also helped with the BP Alaska class tankers. But I think her big career achievement was being the integrated project design team for the TAKE ships. So all these ships, they're still out there, they're still successful. Again, a record of success for Vicky. But in 2003, her father died. And she decided that maybe it's time for her to move back to Long Island, help out her mother. So without having a job, she moved back to Long Island, back to the house that she grew up in. And she put out her own shingle as an independent naval architect. NASSCO kept her busy for a few months in order for her to, let her get a chance to get her feet under her and start to establish a client base. But she's been doing that successfully for 22 years. And mostly what she's been doing is helping out mid-tier shipyards, a lot of them in the Gulf Coast, but other places, including New York. She did some National Shipbuilding Research Program work. She was the interim manager of engineering for Atlantic Marine for a while because they needed a new engineering manager. That brings us to today. So I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to have to start listing all the amazing things that she's done. So let's talk about SNAME first. She's been active in the New York Metropolitan section. She's been on the National Applications Committee for several years. She was inducted as a SNAME Fellow in 2015. Now, just so you know, there's about 10 fellows a year, there's about 4,000 members of SNAME, so you do the math. You know, not a lot of people become SNAME Fellows. If you search One Petro to see what articles that she has authored, first of all, again, it's very easy when your name is Dlugokecki to figure out how many authors you've authored as compared to Smith. So she's given 10 papers at the SNAME national level. And more impressively, she won the Elmer Hahn Award for the best paper on ship production, not once, but twice. She's had 2 stints on the ASNE National Council and is still on the ASNE Scholarship Committee. She's been a professional engineer in New York since 1999. She She's been the NSRP Vice Chair for Ship Design and Materials for the last 6 years. And getting last but not least, directly related to Webb, she was the class agent for 17 years until she tricked me into being the class agent. She was the president of the Webb Alumni Association from 2020 to 2022. You may recall there was something called COVID going on at this happened, and she successfully navigated the Alumni Association through that. She was also the Webb Alumni Association Treasurer for Life, I believe, for maybe 10 years. So all the checks that were signed were Vicky for a good long period. She's actively involved in the Women of Webb organization. I asked her about that. I said, "Do you run it, Vicky?" And Vicky said, "Well, you know, I don't really run it, but some people think I do. I'm definitely the first to talk." Which is the least surprising thing if you know Vicky. But perhaps her greatest achievement in the service of Webb has been to create the Dlugokecki Family Scholarship. So her and her brother Chris, who sadly died a couple years ago, had set up a scholarship for partial room and board for a student, and that continues to this day. But beyond all the achievements and accomplishments, it's Vicky's personality that makes her worthy of this award. Her sense of humor and self-effacing style make it so easy to work with her. She's always ready to help, and she's generous with her time. So there have been 1,815 graduates of Webb up until now, excluding the class of 2025. 143 of them have been women. But I can't think of someone more deserving of the William Selkirk Owen Award than Vicky. And Vicky, I would just like to thank you for being my friend for these last 41 years. It has been a pleasure and an honor. So now I'm going to turn the lectern over to Leah Sosa, the president of the Webb Alumni Association, to actually present the award to Vicky.
Thank you, Steve, for that wonderful introduction of Vicky. Good evening, everyone. It's an honor to stand here tonight to present the Selkirk Owen Award to our esteemed guest of honor. But before I hand it over, I'd like to first tell you a little bit about Selkirk Owen, and then, of course, a little bit about Vicky. As you can read in your program, Selkirk Owen was from Georgia and spent 3 years at Webb between 1900 and 1903, but he didn't graduate from here. He eventually earned a naval architecture and marine engineering degree from the University of Glasgow in Scotland, and after a couple of decades working at shipyards, he returned to Webb as a professor and dean, a position he held for over 20 years. He was an incredible leader while dean of Webb, raising the bar for the curriculum and for the students, and was greatly admired and well respected for all he did for Webb and the shipbuilding industry. He was held in such high regard that an award was established in his memory, which is the Webb Alumni Association's highest honor, and is presented to a graduate in recognition of outstanding achievement and service to the profession and to Webb. This year's recipient is a shining example of that and more. Vicky has shown unwavering commitment to Webb through her service as class agent, involvement in the Alumni Association for over a decade, culminating as president from 2020 to 2022, and potentially for holding the record for most homecomings attended. I think she said she missed only 2. And just impressive is her career, from ABS to NASCO to having her own consulting firm and his business, and is well-decorated SNAMI Award winner as well. There's no doubt she is incredibly deserving of this award. And what makes this 59th Owen Award for Vicky even more special is the fact that she's the first woman in the history of the Webb Alumni Association to win this award. Woo!
You start. I'm gonna.
Sorry. All right. Over the past few weeks, I've been really thinking about what it means about what makes this such a significant milestone.
Breathe. I'll give you a hug.
All right. because sometimes being celebrated for simply being a woman feels a bit silly. But it's not, it's not something we have influence or control over. But what is significant is the example that is being set. And the road that is being paved for the women after her. Someone's got to help me here.
I gotcha.
Yeah, sir?
Other Webb women, young female alumni, and current students can see themselves in Vicky and know that they can achieve the same great things that she has. Good golly, I'm gonna hold it together too. Okay, I, Leah, was actually chatting with my female classmates earlier about this. We all commented about how we remember Vicky well from when we were students and always gravitated to her during homecoming or other campus events. And we didn't realize it at the time, but we were already being led by her example, looking up to a Webb woman who had come before us. So thank you, Vicky, for leading by example and showing us that Webb women are capable of. And before I, Leah, present the award to you, yes, we're gonna make you wait a little bit longer. We have a small gift for you. You ready?
Yes.
Okay.
This I can maybe do.
You can do it? Okay.
Some of you may have listened to the podcast interview between Dean Werner and Vicky. And if you haven't, definitely check it out. It's worth a listen. But in the interview, Vicky shares her story about how she had heard of Webb. And apparently there was an article in Newsday about how the Webb basketball team had finally broken their losing streak. And the dean or president bought everyone beer and pizza to celebrate this occasion. And when she read that article, she thought, wow, that sounds like someplace I'd like to go. And so I found this article in the Newsday archives. And Tuesday, April 3rd, 1984, headline, "A little school, a lot of class." And indeed, at the end of the article, it does say, after a 9-year, 139-game losing streak, on December 20th, 1983, Webb beat Malloy College of Rockville Center 77-59. The whole school celebrated. The coach ordered and the vice admiral picked up the tab. $45 for pizza for the whole college. Today, now winning the Owen
So I
Award.
guess I added beer.
Yeah, you got it. There's been a lot of things that have happened in between. And now, it is a great honor to present the Webb Alumni Association's highest honor, the Selkirk Owen Award, to Vicky Dlugokecki.
I didn't think it was going to be this emotional. First, I'd like to thank the Webb Alumni Association Executive Committee for selecting me for this great honor, the 59th recipient of the William Selkirk Owen Award. I'd like to thank Leah and the rest of the Executive Committee, including my classmate and introducer, Steve Pagan. So I know that Steve Pagan is a distinguished Toastmaster. And he set the bar really high for me, so let's hope that I can do a good job. When Leah called, here we go. When Leah called me to tell me about the Owen Award, first of all, I didn't think she was calling for that. I don't know what she was calling for. I thought she was going to tell me she was pregnant or something. I don't know what she was calling for. And then I'm like, why would she call me and tell me that? So anyway, I went upstairs to tell my mom, who's here with me tonight, but more about mom later. When I told her that I was getting this big honor, she's like, how big of an honor is it? So I went on the website and I started reading what's on the Webb website about William Selkirk Owen to her. And I got to the point where it mentions that it's the highest honor presented to a graduate in recognition of outstanding achievement and service to the profession and their alma mater. And actually tears came to my eyes and my voice cracked while I was talking to her. I think that's when it hit me that how big this honor really is and how honored I really should be. I think about when I was here as a student and a recent grad, the titans of industry who I saw receive the William Selkirk Owen Award. Charlie Visconti, Joe Cuneo, our professors Larry Ward and Tom Bond, William DeBarry Thomas. All of these were Owen Award recipients in my formative years. Later, there were Webbies that I consider my colleagues, albeit they're a bit older. Rich Salato, John Malone, Jay Carson, all Owen Award recipients. I hope that one day in May, 20 or 30 or 40 years from now, one of those seniors will be up here giving their Owen Award acceptance speech and mentioning me in that list of Owen Award winners. And hopefully, I'll be at that homecoming to hear it. So as Leah mentioned, you can probably count on one hand, or maybe two fingers, how many homecomings I've missed since I've graduated. I wish I could say the same about my classmates, but they did make it here today to honor me. I want to talk about my table. My classmates couldn't sit at my reserve table, I'm sorry, because I've got, it's pretty full. I've got my mom here. I've got my cousins here. This is my cousin is actually my mom's goddaughter. They must have picked her as a goddaughter because they knew she would live pretty long, because I don't think she's all that holy. I've got two of my friends here. One is Megan, is one of my oldest and dearest friends, and probably one of my best, and definitely my best friend. And my other friend Donna is here also to join me with this honor, to be here for this honor. So speeches can sometimes be boring. Sometimes they can be inspirational. I remember a commencement address when I was Webb Alumni Association president. The speaker was Carrie Twaith. She was vice president of Shell. And she gave a mantra throughout her speech. And I thought it was very inspiring. And I talked to the girls at the women of Webb this afternoon. And I couldn't remember exactly what, even though it was so inspirational, I couldn't remember exactly what it was. But she says, think big, start small, act now. And when she said that, I was definitely inspired. But this isn't going to be an inspirational speech, and hopefully it's not going to be a boring speech. You see, I'm a storyteller. And that's what you're going to hear during this speech. Steve Pagan covered quite a few stories of mine. If you listen to the pubcast, there's quite a few stories of mine in there. So I had to come up with a whole bunch more. So here we go. Like I mentioned, I've got my mom here with me. Some of you know her, many of you know of her. Steve Pagan mentioned how she's Italian and talked about her. Did you talk about her gravy? No. So anyway, Steve mentioned he's Italian. Because I was local, they also used to come over. I take my classmates home on Sundays for gravy. But enough about that. What we didn't talk about is that almost all of my mom's brothers and sisters, all of my aunts and uncles were born in Italy. My grandmother, who lived with my family her whole life, and she lived a long life to 92, she was in Italy. She sold whatever she could, whatever she had, and she put all my aunts and uncles on a boat and came over in the 1920s. Because this is where her husband was, and he was making a life for them here in the United States. So my grandfather was born in 1870. I don't know if you can believe that. My grandmother was born in 1887. Things were a lot different back then. I remember my grandmother only spoke English, and I remember my grandmother telling us a story about how she would have to go as a child and wash her clothes in the stream. And one day, early November, she saw the parade of the dead while she was washing her clothes on All Souls Day. So there's always a little mystique, I think, in my family. My mom says louder. My mom didn't speak English when she started grammar school. And she was the only one in her family who was allowed to finish high school. All of her brothers and sisters had to go to work at like 16 years old, maybe some even younger. But finishing high school didn't stop my mom from working since she's 12. She cut off the strings from dog sweaters, she packed cookies, and she also sewed gloves. But she only sewed the fingers on the gloves because they didn't trust her with the thumbs. She wanted to go to college, and actually one of my uncles said he would pay for her to go to college. So she took an academic and wanted to, in high school, planned on going to college. But my uncle came home from World War II, found a girl and married her, and my mom's college dreams were gone. So she became a bookkeeper, and when she graduated, she made that her career, and she worked into her 70s. So Steve Pagan mentioned my dad. He was a New York City police officer. He also didn't speak English when he started grammar school. In fact, he went to a grammar school that taught in Polish. So I'm not even sure when my father learned English. He retired relatively early, 26 years on the job, and he became a house husband. So he would go out every day to the shops in the neighborhood. Everyone knew him, whether it was the butcher, whether it was the farm stand girl who's the cashier, whether it was the guys at the Italian deli slicing the meats, and they all said hello to him. Some of them still remember him today. And we always had fresh food in the house every day. So, as a kid from a middle-class family whose parents didn't speak English, I turned out better than I thought I was going to turn out. Even though I was pretty smart in high school, I graduated 4th out of 400 in a pre-engineering class there. My parents weren't sure I was going to make it through to college. Heck, I was going to be the first one in the family to go to college, and they didn't even know what that meant. So as soon as I was old enough, and I have a feeling it was around 17, they made me take the New York City police exam. So I took the exam. I was pretty smart, so I got a pretty high score. So I don't know if you know how it works. Based on your score, you get called back for different types of testing. We did feats of strength. There was a lot of different tests I went through. But because I was going to college, I tried to postpone them as much as possible. Finally, it was the last test, and it was a psychological exam. But by then, I was a senior at Webb, and my parents figured that I was going to graduate. So they allowed me to not go in, and they allowed me to take my name off the cop list. Which is probably a good idea, because after 4 years at Webb, I don't know what the results would have been on that psychological exam. So I mentioned that my mom had started working at 12. Me too. I started working at 12. I was a Little League umpire. I even went to Little League umpire school. Me, a 12-year-old, and another 20 fathers at night school with Flo sitting in the back, making sure none of the guys touched me. So when I was 12, I operated to 8 years old. When I was, it went on and on, you know, year for year for year. Then when I was 15, I went to my father and brother were playing a game. My father was manager, my brother was on the team. I went to watch. The umpire didn't show up, but the head of the umpires was there. He says, Vic, do you have your umpire equipment? I said, I do, it's in my father's trunk. He says, well, go get it, you're umping this game. I'm like, I'm umping this game? So I was the umpire, my father was the manager, and Chris was the pitcher. Needless to say, I don't have to tell you who won that game. So I followed up umpiring with lifeguarding. Actually, I swam all my life, and I still swim today. Other than having to work 48 hours a week over the summer, it wasn't a pretty shabby job for a high schooler. Studies, work, sports, piano. Some of you know that my brother was a way better piano player than I was. My parents instilled in me hard work ethic that has stayed with me for my entire life. Fast forward to our time. Fast forward. Is anyone timing me? Fast forward to my time at Webb. I was able to keep my grades up while still participating in a lot of Webb extracurricular activities. As you heard, I was class president, probably because my classmates thought I could sweet talk the teachers into giving us an extra day on our assignments. I was also a kitchen girl. On weekends, I would work the kitchen and I would take the orders in the morning and deliver the guys their eggs. And on Saturday and Sunday nights, I don't know what they have now, but we had cold cuts. So I would put out the cold cuts and all the accoutrements, and that was my job here at Webb. I can't remember how much they paid me, but I'm sure it wasn't a lot. And then before Matt Kelly crashed to Cordova, while driving back to Webb from going out to the movies in Roosevelt Field, I was actually a lifeguard at Lucille Roberts, which was down by Roosevelt Field, and I lifeguarded there, and I also taught water science to the old ladies. I'm not sure how I got selected, maybe because I was a class president, but I was the class of '88's graduation speaker. I looked and I still have that speech, and I actually brought that speech with me. My speech started with me paraphrasing a classic novel.
Oh boy.
The night before, I'm practicing my speech. And probably the very people here today were taunting me. Sale of 2 titties. I didn't think I was going to make it through my speech the next day. So Ed Campbell was our commencement speaker. And he got up, he spoke before me, and he's giving his speech, and right in the middle of his speech he says, and I want to quote A Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. You see, in the late 80s, the industry was a little depressed, and it fit right in with what we were doing. Okay, at that moment, all my classmates' eyes turned right. Now what are you going to do, Vic? You just used your line. He's the president of the shipyard. I don't know what I'm going to do. So anyway, he finishes his speech. I go up, I'm introduced, I start my speech. And I say, and I quote, in A Tale of Two Cities, Charles Dickens wrote, it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. If he had attended Webb, it probably would have been, it was the worst of times, and it wasn't so bad sometimes. And I looked over at Ed Campbell, and he gave me a nod and a thumbs up, and the rest of my speech went fine. At graduation, I received the Chaffee Memorial Award for my general excellence, which was good because I didn't think I was going to get any of the academic awards. Because I had Mike Hughes and Dave Kring were in the mix. I wasn't getting any of them. Speaking of Mike and Dave, who aren't here, I joined them at MIT along with Ian and Mitch immediately following our graduation. How I got into MIT. At Dean Hadler's memorial many years ago, however many years ago it was, and I have to preface this to say that right before I spoke, Jen Keel / Waters, she's over there, spoke at the memorial too. And she talked about how when she went to talk to Dean Hadler to get a letter of recommendation, I thought it was for grad school, but she tells me today it was to work at the Naval Academy. Dean Hadler was so impressed and so honored to write her a letter of recommendation. So then I get up at the memorial and I talk about how I went to ask Dean Hadler for a letter of recommendation. So Dean Hadler was our thesis advisor. Steve Matz and I did a thesis together. I went and I checked, we got a 90 on it, so we did pretty good. So I figured a letter of recommendation from him was going to be pretty easy to get, right? So I go down, I asked Dean Hadler, I said, Dean Hadler, I'm going to MIT, do you think you're going to write me a letter of recommendation? He's like, ooh. You sure you really want to go to MIT? You know, it's hard there. I said, listen, don't worry. I'm going to 13B. There's not going to be a differential equation anywhere to be seen near me. He's like, oh, okay, I can write you a letter. So I dodged that bullet. So I finished my master's at MIT. It took me a full year, 2 semesters and a summer. I would have loved to stay at MIT longer. All my classmates were staying longer. But after 6 years of college, 1 year before Webb, 4 years at Webb, and 1 year at MIT, my mother had enough. You got to get to work. My first job after MIT was with Mr. Cushing, C.R. Cushing and Company. Mr. Cushing, a King's Pointer, but a true Webb supporter. He's even an honorary trustee. I had many interesting projects there. Steve mentioned a few of them. We were the expert witnesses on Exxon's side for the Exxon Valdez. I did trim and stability calcs for the American Cormorant during Desert Storm, where we floated on and floated off like 30 different vessels to bring over to the Far East, Near East, Middle East. Close. I worked with Larry Schober, class of '87. He's not here. We worked on doing provisioning of spare parts for these 9 Del Monte reefer vessels. When I talk about them, I affectionately call them banana boats. I also did the planned maintenance and condition-based monitoring on all 9 of those vessels. I remember Mr. Cushing putting me in charge of our SNAMI hospitality suite, third one SNAMI, of course. But Mr. Cushing liked to do things on the cheap. So he didn't want the hotel to cater it. So he had me sneak in bottles of liquor and mixer and beer and wine and snacks, all in luggage, and brought it up to our suite. And lay it all out on the tables there. He also put me in charge of buying cigars for after the banquet. Do you guys do that now after the SNAMI banquet? Sit around and smoke cigars? Well, what do I know about cigars? I spent a lot of Mr. Cushing's money on cigars. He didn't make me buy cigars again. My next job was at ABS, which was headquartered in New York City in the World Trade Center. When I started at ABS, we went to 10 days of new hire training down in Houston. So out of the class, which might have been, I don't know, 30, 40 people, there were 3 Americans. The rest were either Asians or Europeans. So we went through class, we went to class on Saturday, you know, the whole week Saturday. They gave us Sunday off. And they told us, here's 2 ABS vans, you guys can do whatever you want. And they put up, you know, on the whiteboard a few things to do, and there was NASA. I said, NASA, that sounds good. So I go, and I put my name on NASA. And the rest of the whole bunch of the Asian guys come, they're like, we're going to NASA too. The other side was Six Flags. All the Europeans were going to Six Flags. The Europeans were going to NASA. So they're like, hey, you gotta come with us. Come to Six Flags. I'm like, I can't. The NASA people think I'm gonna drive them. They're like, don't worry about it. They'll find someone to do it. So I left my NASA party high and dry. They had no driver. Finally, they got Dr. Z to drive for them, and I hope there was no hard feelings. Got my PE license when I was at ABS. ABS, they were good enough to give me their corporate apartment in the city to sleep over the night before the test, so I didn't have to get up super early and take the train in to take the test. I also took a review class for my PE test. And on the first day of class, some guy comes up to me, he says, do you want to be a study partner with me? I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll be a study partner with you. So I remember we go, like, you know, before the next week, and we go, and I brought him up to ABS, 106th floor to study, and he says, is this your first time taking the test? I said, it is. I said, is it your first time taking the test? He says, it is not. How many times have you taken the test? I was like, 5. He wasn't my study partner for too long. I was also the only one in my review class to have passed the test, and that's because I studied hard. And Megan can probably tell you that I studied on the beach in the Hamptons. Cocktail in one hand, PE review class book in the other. After ABS, I headed out to NASCO after my 2 years at ABS. Actually, it was one of my bosses at ABS. His name was George Slegg. He was a naval architect. He was a British naval architect, and he took me out to lunch. He was famous because he was on like one of the Time magazine covers for 9/11. He had gotten out, and he's full of soot, and that was like a big famous picture of him. Anyway, he took me out to lunch, and he told me every naval architect should work in a shipyard at some point in their life. I don't know if they were trying to get rid of me or not, but I went and I got a job at NASCO. At NASCO, I interviewed for naval architecture and initial design. So being initial design, they made me interview with almost every single functional and detailed design manager there was. I think I had 8 interviews. And I remember specifically sitting with the machinery systems manager. And he's looking at my resume. And he says, why are you getting a job as a naval architect? He says, obviously, you're a marine engineer. So I guess my first 8 years of training was pretty well-rounded. My 6 years at NASCO, a whirlwind of engineering, design, and production. I got there in time for AOE 10 sea trials. I don't know if you remember the AOEs. The AOEs were supposed to be a class of 4 ships, but they had to skip one because they were so far over budget. So it turned out to be only 3 ships. I remember so these ships were fast. I remember doing night trials for our speed trials, probably because they don't want the enemy to see how fast they can go. And I remember being outside and these ships flew. I was there for the Watson class LMSRs. During sea trials there, I was the ballast engineer. And just this week, I was talking to an ex-MSC engineer about this story, which I call my pink cargo hold story. So as the ballast engineer, they had me dye, like they gave me some pink dye to put into the fuel tanks. I don't know why I had to do it, but I did. So this pink dye, I don't know if anyone's ever seen it, it's kind of like the consistency of grape jelly. So they said, put it in through the sounding pipes. So I kind of take like some cupfuls and I'm trying to shove it down the sounding pipes, and it's not really going down. I guess in hindsight, I should have probably added a little fuel or something to make it go down. But anyway, I got all the fuel in the tanks. I didn't go and check. And then they decided to run the AFFF foam tests in the cargo holds. So they run the tests, and then people go and they go to look and see to make sure that the foam was in the cargo hold or whatever. And when I go down to the cargo hold, I look around, and there's a pink ring at about 10 or 15 feet high in this giant cargo hold. So apparently what had happened was there was a flange on the sounding tube pipe that wasn't tightened up, and a whole bunch of this pink dye got into the hold, and all the foam turned pink. Took me a really long time to live that one down. When I was the Naval Architecture IPT lead for TAKE, I remember going to our first design review for concept design with the Navy in DC. And I had, because I was Nav Arc, so I had like 5 or 6 presentations. Weight, arrangements, weight, stability, power. I had a lot of presentations. I had 2 the first day. And I thought I did great. But that night, Steve Stryfer, who was the Vice President of Engineering there, grabbed me by the scruff of my neck and said, "You are going to script all of tomorrow's presentations." He says, "Because you go off script way too much when you don't have anything to go by." So I spent all night scripting my presentations. One of my going off script, I remember one of the Navy guys asking, and we had big GAs, but they were cartoons because it was the first 6 weeks of the design. We really didn't even have a design. I had 6 different designs. And I remember one of the guys from the Navy, he raised his hand, I said, "Yes?" He says, "Where's the flag bridge on that house?" I said, "I don't even know what a flag bridge is. But if the spec says you have one, why don't you just tell me where you want it and I'll put it wherever you want." So I guess whatever I said really didn't matter too much, because NASCO won the contract. They got 14 of those vessels, and they're still running around today. My original plan was to stay at NASCO for just a couple of years. 6 years later, as Steve mentioned, my father passed away, so I came back home to spend some quality time with my mom. I flew her out, and we drove cross country back, and it was the trip of a lifetime. Went to Vegas, we went to the Grand Canyon, Painted Desert, we went Salt Lake City, Yellowstone, Badlands, Sturgis, Crazy Horse, Chicago. We eventually ended up in Cooperstown for the Baseball Hall of Fame. So my mom and I went to the Baseball Hall of Fame. I remember my mom telling me stories about her and my dad going to see the Brooklyn Dodgers when they were young. And I also remember I was at the game when the Mets clinched in 1986. And guess whose seats I was in? It was my cousin's seats. It was his, we were sitting in his box seats. Yeah, in his box seats that night.
No more after that.
Yeah. So I got home. Back then, I didn't open my computer for the whole drive, and we didn't have. It's not like we had phones that showed, that gave us our emails. So I opened up my computer when I got home, and luckily, I didn't have a job. but NASCO came through, and NASCO gave me a whole bunch of work to do. I did not leave them high and dry when I left. I stayed a year and made sure that I finished up all the functional design on TAKE. Everything was approved, but they still had stuff for me to do. 6 months later, I got a call from Atlantic Marine down in Jacksonville, and they needed, this is Larry Schober again, they needed someone to come down and help Larry document his engineering processes. The Atlantic Marine Engineering Department was just Larry and a draftsman. Needless to say, I spent 3 weeks down there writing all their engineering processes. Now I got to remember where I was. That was an NSRP project, and I worked on some NSRP projects while I was at NASCO. And I've been working on the NSRP is National Shipbuilding Research Program, and I've been working since that very first non-NASCO gig on my own with National Shipbuilding Research Program, helping mid-tier yards and all yards across the country, helping improve their cost, quality, and schedule. We had a little scare yesterday. I woke up, I wasn't feeling good. I'm like, I don't know, this doesn't seem right. I had a rough week this week. I'm working on a Governor's Island ferry that was designed by Elliott Bay. It's a hybrid ferry. It was built at Conrad, and it's up here doing its acceptance trials. So Monday morning, I woke up at 4:30 a.m., made my way down to the battery, went over to Governor's Island, and I kind of managed the training on the vessel. I had to go in on Wednesday, again, another 4:30 a.m. morning, because we had some noise issues. And then Thursday was acceptance trials, another 4:30 a.m. morning. And I was on my feet for probably like 12 hours, running up and down stairs. It was only me and like another person taking measurements, so it was a rough day. So yesterday morning, my 60-year-old body just said, you can't do that to me anymore. So Gail Marie, I can't make it tomorrow night. Or tonight Heritage Society dinner. But I rested up, and I think I'm okay. I can't, after Leah, I can't not talk about the women of Webb and the women who come before me. I was at a New York Met Section SNAME meeting back in the 90s when I worked downtown, and I went to catch the subway home after the meeting. And I run onto the E train. It was stopped at World Trade Center. I sit down and I look across from me, and it's Karen Hansen, class of '78. Oh, sure. And I go up to her. I said, "Are you Karen Hansen?" She's like, "I am Karen Hansen." "Do I know you?" "Probably not." I said, "But I know you." I said, "I'm Vicky, Webb class of '88. I said, "I know you're the first woman graduate of Webb." And she was so impressed that I would know who she was and what she looked like. And we spent the whole subway ride going back to Penn Station. There was our first woman honor council chairman, Carol Vernon, class of '83. Right? 83. Okay, I got it. Thank you. Jenny Miner, who's Jenny Colmer now. She was our first SO president, I think in '91. I was not SO president, but I was SO secretary. I don't know. Are the students here? They're probably outside. I don't know what SO secretaries do now, but back then, the key quality characteristic for an SO secretary was to be a character. So I definitely checked that box. And so every SO meeting, it was like my very own opportunity to do stand-up. And I think I killed it every time. Jen Panoski, was a Webb Alumni Association president. Gail Marie and I keep going back and forth. She tells me that Jen Colmer was the Webb Alumni Association president before her, but I don't think she was. But Jen was definitely the Webb Alumni Association president, and then comes me, and then comes Leah. The four of us were the first 4 women Webb Alumni Association presidents. There's Christy Tika, not a Webbie, but a teacher of Webbie. She is an honorary member of the Webb Alumni Association. She was the first woman to receive a Webb honorary degree in 2018. And no talk of Women of Webb would be final until we mentioned Gail Marie. Is an honorary Webbie, and she's our Director of Alumni Affairs. In August, she will have 44 years here, her entire career. There aren't that many people who stay at the same job for their entire career, except for maybe people at Asian shipyards and Ian Bush. Thank you, Gail Marie, for all you've done for Webb. For most of my adult life, I've been a believer that there's no such thing as coincidences, that things happen for a reason. I read the book, The Celestine Prophecy, back in the 1990s, and I think that might have influenced my thinking. I was in Jersey for a SNAME membership committee meeting one day, and I ran to catch the PATH train back, and I just missed the train. Caught the next train, and we were diverted around the World Trade Center. That's the day they bombed the basement of the World Trade Center. On the Del Monte boats, I was in Costa Rica, and the flight was overbooked, and they were offering people $400 to take the flight the next day. $400 back then, I was ready to take it, but I'm like, I don't know. I've been on the ship for so long, I'm just gonna go home. That night, San Jose, capital of Costa Rica, had a 7.0 earthquake. 9/11, I was at NASCO, but I could have been at ABS. I was definitely disappointed when they hired Mark as president of Webb. You see, I was in the running for president of Webb too. Too bad I didn't know what the word pedagogy meant. And you know, I and my nephew were both disappointed when Webb didn't take him. But I know things happen for reasons. And my brother got sick, came down with stage 4 cancer. And I was not Webb president, so I was able to spend the year with him down there. And another non-coincidence, I met Megan 35 years ago. Her father's house was in the same town that Chris lived in. And I was allowed to stay at her house for that year to take care of my brother. And my brother's son, he is in college down in South Florida. He's in his second year of a 4-year MBA program. And he's gonna have an internship this summer in Madeira, Portugal, with Chris's company, where he was executive vice president. So there are no coincidences. Things happen for reasons. I didn't think I was going to make it through that part. As Steve mentioned, even before Chris was sick, we established the Dlugokecki Family Scholarship. I met the first recipient today. She's a lovely girl, freshman, Giovanna. Chris and I were actually the first brother and sister to graduate from Webb. And I'm sure that he and my dad are looking over us right now during this presentation. Unless, of course, my dad grabbed Chris and took him over to the Bronx to watch the Mets in the Subway Series. So I'd like to conclude, and again, thank you, the Webb Alumni Association, for honoring me with the 59th William Selkirk Award. I will continue to strive to make our industry and our alma mater the best that it can be.